Hello, good morning. We would like to start. Good morning, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andrew Samoa, and I'm excited to welcome you to this very important conversation. It's a hybrid event, and so some people will be joining online. So as soon as I get the go ahead, we can start. All right. As we all know, 2025 has gotten off to a rather difficult start for Africa. If you look around, you will see that not only are we seeing old insecurities getting worse or persisting, we are already witnessing raging tensions and battles in Sudan and Eastern DRC. In West Africa, the threat of 3 countries to break away from ECOWAS is no more a threat, it's now reality. And if you look globally, the world is not the same. Global governance and economic dynamics are shifting rapidly. And if you like, in what we can call a Trump 2.0 era, which, as we all know, is characterized by aggressive projection of power. With everything happening around us, it is clear that Africa cannot continue, to do business as they did yesterday. And so it's important that Africa, in positioning itself, gets the leadership right, because leadership is required to spearhead the way forward for the continent to, remain relevant, not just to itself and its people, but to the world in general. And so as this year's summit is really focusing on getting a new crop of African leaders to lead the African Union Commission, we can't help but to keep asking whether these issues happening on the continent and outside are the very issues that are informing the summit, will inform the choice of leadership, and indeed, whether whoever comes as the leader or the leaders will have what it takes to position Africa globally. And so that's why we are here. And we are basically going to help ourselves by trying to find answers to a very simple question. Can the AU reposition Africa in a changing global governance landscape? As I indicated, my name is Andy Asamoah, and so I am excited to be the host of today's discussion. And so whether you are joining me or joining us online, or you are here in this room, I take the opportunity to welcome you. The event is being co-organized by the Institute for Security Studies and the Institute for Peace and Security Studies, IPSS. By way of introduction of our panel, let me indicate that I'll be posing questions to a team of very intelligent African thinkers, as you can see them. I took the liberty of asking them to sit before we start. And so we have a very impressive lineup of African thinkers. First is Professor Pierre L.O. Lumumba, a renowned lawyer, Pan-Africanist, and a member of the Tana Forum Board. We will have the privilege of listening to him. Prof, you're welcome. After him will be Jana Nkube. Jana is the Deputy Chief Executive Officer, Crisis Action. Jana, thanks for leaving everything and rushing to others. We really appreciate you. We will also be joined online by Professor Thomas Tieku, Professor of Politics and International Relations, the University of Western Ontario, Canada. He will be online, joining us at, I think, around 2 a.m. of his local time. So we really appreciate him for joining us. And then last but not the least, Dr. Paul Simon Handy, my boss, who is the Regional Director of ISS for East Africa and representative to the African Union. And so I'm excited to introduce the panel. So without wasting time, we are going to zoom in to the business of the day. If you check the agenda on your table, you would see that we have a keynote address section. In the midst of all the changing realities in the world, some of which I mentioned, and even in Africa, many of us are asking very important questions, but also very basic questions. How is Africa doing in the midst of all of these? What are the challenges Africa is grappling with? And indeed, how can Africa position itself going forward? These are fundamental questions that Africans are asking, development partners are asking, and African policy actors are also asking themselves. And so we took the liberty of inviting Professor Pielo Lumumba and to give him 10 minutes to reflect in a keynote address on the subject of repositioning Africa in the world, the realities, the opportunities and challenges currently. So I would like to give Prof 10 minutes. Prof, you can speak from here. And then afterwards, we will get into a Q&A session with the other panelists. Thank you, Prof, for coming.
Thank you. I'll take 15 minutes because I'll need 5 minutes to give historical context. Let me how glad I am to be present at this. More than she has ever been. In a few days' time, the heads of states and government will be meeting, but a number of countries will be absent on the ground that they were victims of unconstitutional change of government. Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, Guinea, Gabon, and Sudan will be absent. And they are absent in a continent that talks about unity. It is contradictory. I'm speaking to you at a time when about 63 years ago, here in Addis Ababa, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, on 25th day of May, 1963 to be exact, in his iconic speech said, Africa must neither look east nor west. She must look forward. As I speak to you, Africa is confused, schizophrenic. She does not know whether to look east, west, north, up, or down. She is confused. Many who talk about Africa are quick to try to shut us up by telling us, don't go back into history, as if that history does not control the present. It does. The psychology of the colonizer that existed in Berlin in 1884 and 1885 is alive and well as we speak. It is alive and well because although African countries regained their independence, the neo-colonial project still dictates the continent of Africa. You will note that before independence was granted, our foreign policy was also choreographed so that the British, in order to continue to control our colonies, created something called the Commonwealth of Independent Nations, which is headquartered in London and whose leader is the British monarch at all times. Tell me about equality. The French created something called La Francophonie, cleverly created in Niamey, in Niger in 1970, but headquartered in Paris. It is still alive and well to continue linguistic and cultural dominance. The Portuguese created something called the Community of Portuguese-speaking countries, headquartered in Lisbon. These are the traditional colonizers who we must boldly say are still present. And this is not the time to be politically correct. This is the time to speak the truth, however painful it is. And after that, the Americans also came, not having been a typical neo-colonizer, but with the Pax Americana, which we have seen after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and which is alive today. The Chinese are a little softer in the manner in which they do things, but they were not neo-colonizers. But they are here with huge appetite for African resources, feeding huge appetite for African leaders who want to build stadia and other infrastructure. The Russians are also here. The Turks are here. The Emiratis are here. It is in that context that we must talk about repositioning the African Union. A weak organization which is famous for its dithering and issuing sterile statements, even in the face of conflicts. And I dare say that by giving examples. How can it be that when there is a diplomatic conflict between Ethiopia and Somalia, it is Turkey that mediates it in Ankara, yet the Organization of African Union is headquartered here in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia? How weak can an organization be? How can it be that you have an African Union which claims to be diplomatically agile? And as I speak to you here, the United Arab Emirates is convening a meeting of the conflict of Sudan here in Ethiopia. Where is the African Union apart from organizing sterile meetings and attending meetings which are sponsored by donors? Where is it? The Democratic Republic of Congo is in conflict now. The Luanda-Nairobi conflict is collapsing. And only yesterday in Addis Ababa, in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, in what was considered a diplomatic faux pas, the chairman of the AU Commission was actually excluded from the meeting. Tell me about repositioning. I can go on and on, but I'm mindful of time. Africa must rethink. It is John Henry Clark who famously said that for Africans to say that black is beautiful is nonsense. Africa's black and beauty is nonsense if Africa is not black and powerful. Africa must be black and powerful. It is only then that we will be respected. We are divided into 54 countries, and I've traveled this continent. You go to different countries and you look at the ambassadors of Western countries and the United States of America. They treat African countries as if they were plantations and as if our heads of state were mere head boys and head girls. How can we change that? We can change that by being strong. When we migrated from the Organization of African Unity in 1999, 2001, culminating in the Durban Declaration, one assumed that the AU would be a body that would not be described as a useless, toothless bulldog. Unfortunately, that is the reality. And if we want to position ourselves, it is incumbent upon us to have only 3 meetings here in Addis Ababa. 3 meetings. not sponsored by USAID, not sponsored by JIZ, not sponsored by UK Aid, not sponsored by Danida, not sponsored by all these Western organizations or China or Russia, sponsored by ourselves. And when we convened that meeting, we only asked 3 questions. Agenda item number 1, what is wrong with us? Agenda item number 2, what can we do about it? And agenda item number 3, within what period must we do it? How can we be a continent? AU is 70% funded by donors. He who pays your meal controls who you are. Fellow Africans, this is an occasion for us to be ashamed of ourselves. I'm suggesting to you that if we want to reposition ourselves and to be respected in the world, we must stop being confused and divided. As I conclude, Africa is the only continent which is still defined in the following terms: Anglophone, that we are speaking English; Francophone, that we are speaking French; Lusophone, that we are speaking Portuguese; and very soon, if we are not careful, Sinophone, because we will be speaking Mandarin; and very soon, if we are not careful, Russophone, because we'll be speaking Russian; and if we are not careful, Arabophone, because we'll be speaking Arabic. I look forward to the day that it will be Swahiliphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we know the problem. Let us not pretend. We know we are divided and weak. We know that Europe and America and China and Russia and everybody else loves a weak and divided Africa. We know that our foreign policy is incoherent. We must sit here and let me tell you, my good friend, the good doctor, I'm not a Jewish prophet nor related to one. But in the next few days, there'll be a meeting of heads of states and government. This is what is going to happen. Each one of them is going to deliver a pro forma speech written by bureaucrats in the office, except for few heads of states and government. Many of them will be meeting their speeches for the first time on the podium. They'll speak nice words. They'll talk about peace. They'll talk about declarations about what is going to happen to Africa. Then they return to their capitals. They'll not talk about the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They'll not talk about Sudan. They'll not talk about the conflict that is happening right here in Ethiopia. They'll not talk about Somalia. They'll not talk about Sahel. They'll not talk about northern Mozambique. They'll not talk about Central African Republic. They'll not talk about the conflict in southern Cameroon. They'll not talk about the recent assault of rebels in Djibouti. They will say nothing, and if they do so, they'll say it in such a weak manner that nothing will happen. They'll not condemn Donald Trump. They will not. They'll not talk about Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. They'll want to be nice. If you want to change, let us be open and know that there is a new scramble for Africa. And this is the time for those who love Africa to do the right thing. And this is what I want to conclude with, is a statement made in 1947 by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, otherwise known as the Mahatma. This is what he told General Dyer. When he told him, but when we leave, there'll be conflicts and problems in India. And the Mahatma said, yes, but they will be our problems. We will solve them in our own way. We will have our African problems. We'll even walk from Addis Ababa to Dhaka. We may have no electricity. We may have no caviar, but they will be our problems. This is the time. I don't like Donald Trump for many things, but I like him for one thing, saying no more aid to Africa. Let us suffer. You who come from other civilizations, with due respect to you, I'm telling you, stop giving us aid. Stop giving us aid, because in the last few years, you have migrated from being donors and then you changed into development partners. Is the same thing. Stop giving us aid. GIZ, stop giving us aid. NORAD, stop giving us aid. CEDA Sweden, stop giving us aid. Danida, stop giving us aid. We will survive. Then we will redefine our foreign policy. Then we will meet you at the table of human civilization as equals, not as beggars. That is my message. God bless you.
Okay. So I think Prof has laid out his reflections on where Africa is, the challenges Africa faces, and in his words, what he thinks Africa should do going forward. He's raised issues about signs of disunity on the continent, seeming confusion of African states, grapple with power competition on the continent, weak African institutions and their inability to mediate and resolve crises. And he's indicated that for us, or for Africa, to be able to position itself, there's the need for three things. The need for Africa to rethink and work towards strengthening itself. Africa needs to work towards unity and stop being confused, and that Africa needs to commit to discussing the issues and finding solutions to them in the way they present themselves without mentioning options. And I think these are very clear in the words of the professor. And I think that the next sections, I will join the panel. Prof also will join us. And as we discuss, at any point that he wants to come in, he will feel free to be able to do that. I think we will need microphones on this side. We have just one microphone on this end. Please bring the microphones to the panelists, please. Given that we are all expecting the summit to happen, and so the conversation we are going to have will focus more on what is on the agenda of the summit, issues around the leadership, issues that the summit will be discussing, and how Africa will use all of that in the context of the challenges that the Prof raised in the world. And so I would like to, from this time on, rather pose questions to the panelists, 2 questions, maximum 3, and I will expect them to be succinct in their responses so that we can have more time for discussions. And if you have any question that you may want to pose to the Prof when it gets to the Q&A section, I know there will be many that he will need to respond to. And so I would like to turn to the issues of what is on the agenda of this coming summit. And I think many of us are looking forward to seeing what they are and what we expect and why they were included. And so I would like to turn to Jana Kube, and I would like to ask you, first of all, the Prof spoke about many things. In your view, what are the top 3 most pressing issues that Africa is grappling with at the moment?
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Prof, for that very challenging and yet inspiring provocation that you have shared with us this morning. I think the first one for me, Andy, is the fact that a lot of Africans are not able to put food on the table on this continent is a big issue. And that has so much land. You have continuously, we talk of the statistic of 60% of the most arable land in the world is in Africa. It's being leased out to the Saudis to the Emirates and others, and is not being fully utilized by our countries to actually facilitate and increase agricultural production. The fact that Africa only produces about 10% of agricultural produce, it really is shocking. The fact that most of our countries, and I come from Zimbabwe, oh my goodness, most of the food we consume in our countries we are importing from elsewhere is an indictment to the leaderships of our countries. And so as a continent that is most affected by climate change, in Southern Africa, we're currently going through a rainy season. We're so relieved because we've been going through a drought for over 3 years. We're seeing livestock, people really suffering from lack of food and ability to put food on the table. So that's one. Because at the end of the day, if Africa is working, for me, it must work for the ordinary person on the ground. We can do a lot of things. We're talking earlier with Prof about the things we build, the monuments that get built. I love how transformed every time I come to Addis, for instance, how transformed this city is. But if people cannot put food on their table and you have a beautiful city, there's no point. So that's one. The second one is what I'll call maybe a youth crisis. We used to say the youth bulge because, of course, Africa is the youngest population. And then there was a time, even we coined statements as part of the AU system and called it the youth dividend, because we're saying we can get benefits out of this and generate rewards from it. But we really haven't invested so that we can get the dividend, because you get a dividend when you invest. They're not investing in our young people. You look at our health systems, you look at our education systems, and last year the theme of the AU was focused on education. What investments are we making so that the young people of this continent actually are generating and are productive so that Africa gets out of the quagmire that Prof well pointed out? So we actually have a youth crisis on this continent. The median age of Africa is 19. And you look at the leaderships across the continent, including even those vying for the election that is coming up, there's a disconnect. It's like there's a certain world where those who rule this continent live in, and the rest of the world where the people of Africa are actually living. And then maybe my third one, I really think is really around the insecurity and lack of safety for African peoples on this continent. The one continent in the world that has seen an increase in conflict is Africa. 30% of the conflicts that are there in the world right now are in Africa, and it is African peoples who are actually right now bearing the brunt of that.
If I can follow up on that, I know you've had a look at the summit agenda, and you are saying these are the 3 most important things. How do they reconcile? Are these the issues the leaders are discussing, or these are different things? If you can give us a peek into what is going to be discussed and why you think some things are not reflected.
If you had told me before I came that you were here to trick me like that, I would have not come on the plane. The agenda, maybe I'll just touch on the 4 things that I think are most prominent. Obviously, the issue of the elections of the AU Commission leadership is a primary in everybody's minds. That's what has been the biggest focus. We are expecting a new chairperson, vice chair, and commissioners being elected, with some running again, particularly amongst the commissioners. And we also are expecting elections for the 5-3-year rotational membership of the Peace and Security Council. So that's elections. The theme of the year on reparations which is a topic and an issue that has been brewing for over 30 years. And this is now the moment we are putting it on the table. I am glad that one thing I resonate with, which connects, I think, to what I have said, is the focus on by the Peace and Security Council state of peace and security in Africa, including, I think, the day before the heads of state meet, the Peace and Security Council at heads of state level, looking specifically at Sudan and the DRC. And then, of course, this is the meeting where the AU hears reports from the other organs and institutions, APRM, NEPAD, and others. So those, I think, are the 4 big agenda items. If I just quickly maybe just touch on each of them, I think I'll start with the elections. I think I already have alluded my frustration and maybe level of disillusionment with elections, in that I really feel disappointed that East Africa, Prof, where you come from, really has disappointed us with the candidates that you have put on the table for us. Because, like I say, I look at the age range of the population of the continent, average age 19, and I look at the age of the candidates that are expected to run this institution that is supposed to actually invest and generate dividends for 19-year-olds. I am not sure there's any inspiration that I am taking out of that. That's all I will say, because I want the new chairperson to work with me. Quickly on reparations, I've really struggled with this. And I've had to find a silver lining for me. Part of the challenge we have had as Africa is we are so stuck in the past. We are so stuck in our perception of being small, because honestly, except maybe if you have not experienced it, as a woman, as a Black person, as an African, being looked upon, down upon is a reality I know can live with you the rest of your life, and you have to continue fighting it. And I'm hoping that focusing on reparations this year is the opportunity for the boil that has been obsessing Africans to just, be squeezed out, so that we can actually begin to look at now and the future. But I'm struggling with connecting it to the issues of the young people today and the things that the continent is experiencing today. So I'm hoping it becomes the opportunity for the past to come out, that we start finding some reconciliation amongst ourselves. But yeah, there are challenges with this, because even if we have a plan on reparations, trying to get justice, from who do they even accept that they're guilty of anything and are willing to pay any reparations towards anything? But even then, I think the Prof put it so well, we're so fractured, we are so divided, we act for our own member state country interests. You still have 210 Africa and Italy, Africa and China, Africa, and so you cannot have this agenda if Africa is not working together as one. So there are a lot of these challenges that are there.
There are 2 things you mentioned which I think are very important. The issue about your assessment of the leadership or the candidates that have been put forward, right? I'll come to that. And I know issues about also the reparation. Later on, I will ask Dr. Paul Simon whether he thinks this year could have been discussing something else. But you can reflect on it. But I want to pick on the point you made about leadership and turn to Prof. Tieku, because he's worked quite extensively on Africa Union elections and leadership processes. And I would like to ask Prof, if you can hear me, I'm turning to you. Based on what Jana said, right, that this summit is focusing on the election of senior leadership for the AU Commission. Do you agree with Jana's assessment of, first of all, the quality of candidates the East is producing and the process itself? If you can succinctly assess what the process is and how you see the candidates coming from the East, I will really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, and Andy. And if the technical people can make my video available, that would be very helpful. Thank you so much for including those of us in the diaspora. We tend to say that you become more African when you leave the continent. So when event like this happened and we are invited, we feel thrilled to be part of it.
We want to see you in the room.
Next time
Your
I'll be in
video-
the room.
No, I mean your video. Is it possible to switch it on?
I turned on the video, but I think it's been disabled.
Please go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
It was on earlier on, but I think it's been disabled. So just so let me make a few remarks about the sort of candidate, and let me take a point of departure from the wonderful point that my sister made about the candidates and the age. I don't want to make kind of ageism argument here, but it's difficult to comprehend that we have a continent where 70% of the population of under the age of 35, and yet the average age of the candidate is 69. And the reason I'm hammering on this is the fact that to be an effective chairperson or deputy chairperson, you need an extreme level of energy. You're constantly on air. You're constantly in long meetings. So if you don't have the energy, if you don't have the kind of, sometimes a bit of youth enthusiasm, you are going to struggle on the job. And that's why I think it's not just for anything that I'm making that point. But on the process, let me say that my overall assessment of the entire process, and part of the reason why we have this kind of candidate is a result of the process. And I'll talk about why the process has led us in this particular direction. My overall assessment of the process is what I consider to be mixed. On one hand, we have some part of the process wonderful, and I'll highlight one of them, since I think I have to try to be positive. The fact that we have hired an independent consultant to screen the commissioners is a very, very positive and good development. And let me throw this here to the room. The fact that 60% of the candidates that member state nominated failed to meet the minimum requirement of the election rules, 60% failed to meet it. Just only 70% is an indication that member states do not often put the best candidate forward. And therefore, we need a third party often to screen members, to screen the candidates that are put forward. That's the number one point that I'm going to make. The second point that I'm also going to make is the fact that the system that has been put in place since 2018 is unnecessarily complicated. And the complication comes from the fact that member states took a decision to turn the election into, or base it on a rotational basis. If you have done good research, you know that rotational systems tend to produce one of two outcomes. One is that they tend to produce candidates who are regime loyalists. Wonderful, they tend to have support from the government. The problem is that they have a credibility and trust issue among other leaders. And second, when they are quote unquote political godfathers or political patrons, when they lose power, they become orphan. And in most cases, they are not effective. So that's the number one point. Second is that rotational systems tend to produce candidates that their government often want to exile them because they want to silence them at home, or often they want to make sure by silencing them, by putting them or moving them into international organization. And this is part of the reason why we have this kind of the slate of candidates. And it is not a sheer coincidence that of all the candidates, we have all men in that particular age bracket. And there is no one single woman, which is a huge indictment of the process.
Prof, it appears you are, some would say you are being pessimistic a bit. Are you saying that the process will not give Africa the leadership Africa needs at this point in time? I need a yes or no from you, and then you can explain.
I don't think so. It will give us good commissioners. I think I'm very, very happy about the sort of commissioners that have been put forward. But I am a little bit concerned that it will not produce the kind of leadership that we need. And I'll highlight a few of what the kind of leadership that we need. Number one, we need.
I can come to you on that one. I can come to you on that one.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
When we get to the portion where we are discussing Africa's presence in the world, which Simon will come to. But I'm aware that Prof. PLO Lumumba written to the African leaders about the process, right? I don't know what his issue was or whether you made suggestions for improvement. In brief, can you?
I did write to all African heads of states and government in the month of October, telling them that the process is opaque and that they ought not to hold the elections. I can also confirm to you that we then acted for a person and went to the African Court of Human Rights on 4th of October. They declined jurisdiction. Yet, ironically, on 28th of January, knowing that the meeting is about, they now accepted jurisdiction. And the reality is that the system is meant to proceed. And if you go to, when I say the process is a process that is opaque, I then wrote to the current chair of the AU to tell me the qualifications of the candidates, some of whom are not qualified. And he did not respond. And the fact is that the system is rigged from day one, and I'm using very blunt words because that is what we need to do. So the system is rigged. It is meant to produce a leadership that kowtows to the current requirements of the AU, a weak leader or weak leadership. And if you traveled across the continent and you ask any 10 people, perhaps only one knows about what is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. But Prof. Tiko, I will come to you later. But that draws an attention back to Jana. Jana raised the issue about reparation being the topic for the theme of the year, right? And Paul, before you speak to the global issues, I would like to put you on the spot by asking whether, in your view, it should be a different subject. Because there are ongoing crises in DRC, Sudan, Mozambique, and we are discussing reparation. Does it not raise questions about the kind of prioritization of issues we have on our agenda?
Thank you, Andy. I would like to start by saying that I share Jana's views on that topic. And I'll add a few other things. I am uncomfortable with the timing of that topic, theme of the year, for the reason that we're going through global shifts, and that will probably be accelerated with I just spoke to someone in this room, and we agreed that we have a disruptor in chief somewhere in DC. So this will certainly accelerate the pace and the scope of disruptions that we are going to see. I see this theme of the year of the AU as something that could add to disruption at a time where we need collaboration, cooperation, to build bridges, to heal our multilateral system. So, and I also share the view that it takes us to the past, and it also, unfortunately, in my view, it does not point to the issues we should be dealing with. The past is the past, and we should also take responsibility for that past. International relations are brutal, and weak people tend to be eaten up by stronger ones. So, Prof, I agree. It's about being powerful. Our difficult past was also a result of our weakness. And so today, in today's world, we have to work on being more powerful. And I don't think this team helps us being powerful. Thank you.
You touched on the international system being very brutal. There are debates about G20, UN Security Council reform, and then Resolution 2719, and other related things. There's also a fact, but an acceptance that Africa's agency is increasing. What do all of these mean for Africa? Added to the fact that Africa seems not to be focusing on that, we are discussing reparations. What do all these mean for the AU in particular?
When we talk about Africa's agency, we are scholars of international relations. Okay, there's a good news. The good news is, I agree with you. There's a positive momentum about the African continent. I mean, I struggle to say Africa because we need to define what is exactly Africa. Is it the AU? Is it the 55, Prof? Not 54? We have 55 member states. So, what is exactly Africa there? And if it's the AU, is it the Commission? Is it the PSC? Is it all the agencies? We need to know that. So, but there's a positive momentum globally. Although I'm always a bit worried about gifts. I mean, when Africa is called to be part of the G20, I always think if something comes cheap, then, I mean, if it's for free, maybe you are on the menu. So it's not necessarily a good thing because, and that's the bad news, Africa is not one country. It is, and it's also not a monolith. There's very little, let's say South Africa is not Lesotho, and Nigeria is certainly not Djibouti. So these countries have very different interests, and will be very difficult. I mean, the European Union already sees how difficult it is to define a common position, and you guys are 27. We are more than double, and with struggling foreign policies, so it's extremely difficult to talk about that Africa. But having said that, I think the momentum, the positive momentum is coming at a very strange moment, actually, because it's coming at a stage where the continent is facing some difficulties. The one is that within Africa, our multilateral system is also broken. I mean, the African peace and security architecture needs to be readjusted to the type of challenges we are facing. It was crafted at a time where building an African standby force was maybe useful, but today I'm wondering if the African standby force is what we need for climate change or for terrorist threats. So there's a bit of reflection that needs to go into it. But maybe more worrisome, what we are also facing today is the demise of anchor state. Countries that are supposed to bear more responsibility are facing internal crisis. I can name them. I mean, internal crisis. They are looking inwards because they have to fix their own systems. Whether you take South Africa, and that inwards looking actually prevents them from taking a more robust role both in the region and on the continent. South Africa is facing with the fact that the ANC is losing power, so the ANC has to recollect and try and see how it maintains its power. It leaves very little room for power projection in the region. And we see that South Africa's role in Mozambique and now in the DRC, it's rather demonstrating those weaknesses. South Africa used to be better at that. Take Nigeria for the last two, let's say, the last 15 years, Nigeria has been inward looking. Nigeria has not even taken the type of leadership that would have been expected of it in West Africa. So we can go on and on with North Africa, the Horn, where actually literally every country in the Horn wants to be an anchor state and a hegemon, but it's also showing weaknesses. We can go on and on. So the crisis of these countries weakens this African agency. So both at the level of the collective, the AU, and at the level of individual state, that positive moment I was alluding to is actually more the result, the outcome of Africa's weakness than the outcome of its strength. And this is the paradox I wanted to underline.
It appears you're mapping a system where the connection between Africa's strengths and the realities out there are beginning to show a mismatch. Because of time, tell us what you would propose to the AU as strategies for positioning itself. Don't speak to it. I mean, don't speak to it. Just mention them. Boom, boom, boom. Any three things. What should the AU do?
Okay. I think what we need is a more proactive commission. The commission has been complaining too much that member states do not provide the space for the commission to act, but I'm also wondering if the commission has used the little space it had to do things. We need a commission that takes more initiative, prioritizes actions.
Okay.
And then secondly, a Peace and Security Council that makes a small effort in tracking the implementation of its decision. It's a decision-making machine and a very weak implementer. So a bit of seriousness in how to track implementation or not would be in the interest of the AU. And then thirdly, I think member states will have a clear idea of what they want the AU to be. Sometimes I have the feeling that partners have a clearer idea of what kind of AU they wish than actually member states. Member states seem to be confused about where they see the AU in the next 20 to 30 years. Because of the control they would like to have on it and missing opportunities that are actually opening up for the AU.
And which is where I turn to Prof. You almost gave us indication of the ideal candidates we need for the AU, right? What, in your view, are the ideal qualities the leadership should have to be able to position Africa well and address both challenges here and outside?
Thank you, Andy, for that question. I think I addressed that question in the book that you edited. But here I am going to focus much more on the bolts and nuts of what we need as a leader. And the first one that I really want to underline is the fact that we need a sharp thinker and a visionary leader, committed to Team Africa. The challenge we have is that there's no shortage of leaders on the African continent, but there's a shortage of principal leaders. Leaders who will be able to say no to foreign manipulation. Commissioners or chairpersons who will be able to say no, the rules of the commission do not allow me to do the ABCD that you are asking me to do, right? Because the calls are going to come. The calls are going to come from presidents, they are going to come from ambassadors, and they are going to come from foreign ministers. So you have to be able to be firm in telling them that if the calls come, they tell you, and this is a classic case of an ambassador who will be tough on the budget committee, and then the next day, the person will pick up a phone and ask you, my candidate is contesting for this particular election, he's the number 4. Is it possible for you to push that person to the number 1 spot? You should be able to tell the person that the rules of the commission do not allow me to do that. And that is number 1 that we need. Okay, so that free thinking and on the shelf. Second, and I cannot underline this enough, we need energetic, action-oriented leader. Someone, because you are going to be the number 1 diplomat of the continent, you are going to be engaging in high-level diplomacy. You're going to be sitting in long, arduous kind of meetings. Do you have the energy to be able to do it? Are you going to spend a lot of time airborne? Are you going to use the time in the air to strategize? Or are you going to use the time to sleep? Right? Those are the little nut and bolt issues that I think we take them for granted, but they are so important for you when you are running a place like the African Union Commission. And then the last one, which is the third point, is that we need a leader who is able to absorb briefings. I think it will shock the chairperson or deputy chairperson, the amount of information that they're going to be exposed to. And if you are not able to absorb your briefings, what will happen is that the last person who will leave your office, the information that is given to you is the one that you are going to carry. And that is very damaging. And we've had that problem on the African continent. So let me sum it up with a quick one, just to say that we need a principled leader with integrity and moral standing to stand up to foreign leaders and African leaders. A visionary thinker who believes and champions Team Africa, not Team Ethiopia, Team Djibouti, or Team Kenya. And then last one, energetic diplomat, ready to take Africa's agenda to the rest of the world, because we are in a turning point, and we need a good diplomat to take the message of Africa to the rest of the world. Thank you so much.
I'm beginning to think, as you spoke, I saw colors of certain candidates and different colors of other qualities coming in. But on a bilateral, I may ask you who you would put your money on. But I want to turn to Jana to wrap up, then we can open the floor for discussions. What do all these mean for what seems like a misalignment between summit discussions and the realities on the ground, and how do we fix it?
I think the idea that Paul is putting of a more proactive AU commission is actually a good one. We're getting a new leadership in place, and always when there's new, we can be hopeful that they want to show us that they can do something, and that they want to live up to all the promises that they've been churning out since they announced their candidature. And so I'll be optimistic in that way. I want to add on to his challenge on the Peace and Security Council for me to say I would like to see a Peace and Security Council that actually uses some of the mechanisms that are already in place. Where is the use of good offices? Where is the use of envoys? Where is the use of the early warning system that is there? As part of civil society, we've been warning about DRC, about Mozambique, about Sudan prior to all of this happening, but you don't see robust action. So I would like them to actually use the spaces that they have. And then The one I will throw is not a new idea. I know we all reminisce and secretly think about the days of Mbeki, Obasanjo, and Wad. They led us to the AU. Can we see some member states choose to arise and informally come together to create maybe, for me, I'm calling for an A7. And I think we can debate which 7 countries those are. But perhaps in that informal space where those countries and those leaders choose to champion Africa, we can start seeing something change in this organ that has got 55 member states.
Thank you. And I think that links to the idea of anchor statehood. I know Paul has been pushing for P5 or something for Africa. And so it brings the connection. Prof is itching to say things, but I would rather like to end, the run with the panelists and turn to the floor for contributions, questions, or any aspects that we left out without discussing. Please, the floor is open. Prof gave a very powerful speech, but obviously there will be questions asked. Prof, and will find your speech provocative, as Jana said, but I'm expecting questions to be asked so that you may be able to unpack them in a way that helps all of us. So the floor is open. 1, 2, 3, yes. I would like to take the first round of questions, make them as difficult as possible for them. Please, your name, your organization, and please keep your question quite brief. Microphone, please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Brigadier General Richard Edukosiwanya, the Defense Advisor of Ghana to Ethiopia. I've got 2 statements which I read some time back, and I just want to read it and find the thought or the opinion of our discussants, because the issue borders on governance, leadership, and then the process of nominating or electing leaders. Please listen carefully to these statements. I was reading a lot and I got it. He said, the first one says, what happens when hard work is overshadowed by influence? The line between merit and manipulations are blurred. How do we rise above systems that award connections for contributions? And how do we build a society where merit truly matters over influence? Talking about leadership for AU, how do we address this? The second one is the concern with democracy and constitutional rule is not confined to the resurgence of military coups. We talk about Niger, Mali, and the rest not being here. It is also relates to the democratic governance deficit, the tempering of constitutional term limits, and the rising disenchantment of the public with elections that are flawed and unable to lead to democratic change. What are your thoughts on this statement? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will take additional questions. Yours will be addressed by Prof. He spoke in line with similar things, please.
Good morning. Myself, Anil Rai. I'm the ambassador of India to Ethiopia and African Union. First of all, I would like to thank you for organizing this very informative and thought-provoking session. And I would like to compliment all the panelists that they have done justice by speaking their mind, and such kind of things has come up with many new ideas. You have put up a disruptive approach to resolve some of the issues which are very long pending. And this kind of self-criticism is one of the ways for faster movement. So I compliment all the panelists for taking this approach. As a country, we have always believed that Africa-led and Africa-owned solution is the best solution for any of the African issues. And one of the point in case is, I will give you an example that when the GERD dam issue was brought to the Security Council in 2021, so we were also the non-permanent member of the Security Council. So we took a lead to make sure that the Africa-led solution should first, Africa-led approach should first look into this issue. And if it becomes a security issue, then only it should come to the Security Council. And fortunately, all the member states agreed to this process. And same is the issue for the G20. When we got the chance to get the presidency of G20, we were very sure that unless the Africa is there on the table, they may not, means no one is competent enough to give a solution to the African issues. On coming to this African Union related issues, what I feel is, I mean, this is a comment from my side, is that a good or bad chairperson is the one who he has to be decided the type of delegation of powers which is given to him. So if in the present structure of the African Union, the delegation of power is not given either to the president of the African Union or the chairperson of the African Union Commission, even though I have a very bright person, whether he may able to make a reform. The second one is that you have a system of committee of elders. So these are very prominent people. So if at least their voices are made prominent, then what will happen that the civil society ideas get entrenched into the member state driven African Union, and this may cultivate a habit of looking into a much broader issues. And the third thing which is very important and I liked much is that for many of the issues you have champions of the African Union. Like for peace and reconciliation, the championship is with the head of state of the Angola. So he is making a process. So these are some of the broad-based good issues of the African Union, and I feel that if we strengthen these pillars, then it may grow and it may able to give more strength to the present structure of the African Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can I take additional? So this side has had two. Can I pick one from here and one from there for round one, please? Please bear with me. Yes.
Thank you for the keynotes. My question goes to directly for Professor Lumumba. It has been said again and again and over again the last more than...
Please, your name?
My name is Tarafa. I came from FANA Media Training and Research Institute. By profession, I'm historian, heritage practitioner, and a media professional as well. So my question, as I said before, goes to His Excellency Professor. It has been said again and again and over again about, and it has been more than half a century we discussed, it has been told about the borderless Africa, a common currency for Africa, a common passport for Africa. But still the practical move is very slow. So what do you suggest? Because your keynotes was kind of very provocative, heart-touching and inspiring. So as African professor, what practical move should be taken? The AU, the 13th AU summit is at the door, at the gate. So what kind of practical advices you rendering forwarding to the AU summit? And for as I'm an African, as a Pan-Africanist and a young media professional and an African historian, what kind of practical advices and reflection you forward in rendering? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to pick the person next to you. And Prof, I will add mine to it before you respond.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Natasha, AU Counselor at the Embassy of Denmark in Addis. I'll keep it short and straight to the point. We've had a panel that's really combined opinions on that we need a committed energetic, proactive leadership of the African Union. And at the same time, we've had a statement that elections and the process are opaque. It's rigged from day one to create a weak AU leadership. So what needs to change? Is it this system that needs to change? Is it the criteria, more strong criteria, clear criteria for AU leadership? Is it the vetting process? We saw a difference between the vetting of commissioner candidates versus chairperson and deputy chairperson candidates. So looking ahead in an ideal world, what could and should change in that regard? Thank you.
What should change? Desiree, I'll come to you in the next round. One last one from there, and then I will turn to the panelists. Please keep it brief because of our time.
Je vais m'exprimer en français. Je tiens avant tout à remercier les panélistes pour leurs interventions. Ma question s'adresse un peu aux propos tenus par la plupart. J'ai ressenti une forme de division sur la nécessité de se référer au passé. Et j'aimerais essayer de comprendre quelle forme de pont pouvons-nous établir entre le passé et le présent. Je vais essayer d'être un peu plus illustrative. Dans les années 60, on parlait de groupes de Monrovia, de groupes du Caire, et tout cela était basé sur des principes. Donc, ma question est de savoir, l'Afrique en a-t-elle fini avec les principes? Et une observation générale, peut-être un commentaire sur la question des arabophones. Nous avons des arabes, je ne dirais pas arabophones, mais nous avons l'arabe qui est une langue du continent, et à ce niveau-là, Ali Mazroui, qui est un compatriote de notre professeur Lumumba, feu Ali Mazroui, a énormément parlé du caractère endogène de la langue arabe. Donc, ma question est de savoir quel type de regroupement régional aurions-nous besoin. J'ai remarqué l'ambassadeur de l'Inde et une représentante du Danemark émettre des commentaires. Et quand est-ce que pensez-vous que c'était le moment de tenir ce genre de réunion ou ce genre de retraite n'aurait-elle pas été, en anglais on dit relevant, si nous l'avions fait un peu plus tôt, entre Africains, pour avoir ce qu'on appelle des points de vue africains. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. And before I turn to the panelists, Prof, there's a point you made about development partners stopping aid. And when you said that, my heart skipped, purely because I'm looking at it beyond the AU context. I'm looking at the number of people on ARVs, the people in the refugee camps, the reality of the fact that without that aid, there's so much that will go wrong on the continent. How do you reconcile that with a broad recommendation within which you praise President Trump for what he's doing with US aid? How do you reconcile the two? Please
answer that question first. I believe that the reason why Africa remains weak is because of aid. And if you look at the continent of Africa and the level of wastage and theft that goes on in this continent, if we stopped it, we would afford all those things. Just want to give you one simple example. The Abacha money that was returned to Nigeria, the Madueke money that has just been returned to Nigeria, the Mobutu money, the money from Equatorial Guinea's vice president, it is less than what we use. So there is a lot of money in the continent of Africa that is used. And let me tell you, as we are now beginning to see with USAID, you see that the money that is purportedly coming to Africa does not come in its entirety. So there is a lot of misuse, a lot of theft, and perhaps we need that cold shower treatment so that we are able to wake up And I conclude with a very personal example. I've run a foundation which is now in 46 African countries. I've never received a single cent from any donor organization. I use my own money from my activities. It can be done. Not that attempts have not been made to give me money, but I retain my independence by using my own money. It can be done. So all of us who are in these organizations, what you need to do is to persuade our governments to begin to do the right things. And I tell you, it can be done. So that is my answer to your question. Pain in the early days, but after the pain, there will be gain. The second question is to Natasha, who is from the Danish embassy. In my letter that I've talked about, I actually did make the following recommendations. Number one, is that the African Union heads of states and government postpone the elections for 6 months, put together a task force to implement and reform the Kagame reforms. And once that has been done, to establish an implementation task force and to make the process a lot more open and non-rotational. I don't believe in rotation, because rotation means that you now give an opportunity for one, as we have seen. And my good friend, the professor, said that in many of these countries, the regimes use the process to, and I'm using the word exile in quotation marks, to exile politicians who are not required at home. And I want you to look, and allow me to name those who have been chairpersons of the AU. Connery, politician. Jean Ping, politician. After he left here, he wanted to be the president, a nursery school for presidency. Mahamat Faki, former prime minister. Lamini Zuma, politician, after she left here, wanted to be president. Mr. Odinga now, 5 times presidential candidate, the Djibouti candidate, foreign minister for over 20 years. We must liberate the continent from dyed-in-the-wool politicians who want their ego massaged. That is my answer to your question. Question number 3, borderless Africa. When we migrated from the OAU in 1990, starting with the Sirte meeting in Libya, Muammar al-Gaddafi then persuaded the others, and rightly so, that the OAU had done what it needed to do. The follow-up meeting in Durban and ultimately the coming into force of the AU treaty as we know it was that we were now going to the next level. That is the essence of Africa Agenda 2063 of 2013. That after Agenda 2063, which was a more defined way of dealing with the Lagos Plan of Action of 1980 and the 1963 proposals of Kwame Nkrumah, we thought that that is a vision for us. And if you look at all these, Mr. Chairman, don't be impatient, I'm answering a critical question. If you look at each one of these, you've talked about borderless. The Kigali 2081 says that we have a single passport. What happened? We produced a passport, gave it to a few people, then forgot about it. 1988, 1999, 2001, Yamoussoukro Declaration on free airspace. No free airspace. In the last 2 years, we have had meetings on fertilizer in Nairobi, on agriculture in Uganda, Malabo Declaration, Maputo Declaration, and we are importing chicken from Brazil. In other words, what we need to do is to focus on the issue, stop meetings, start implementation. And there is no shortage of good African men and women who can actually do that. We know what ought to be done. Lastly, on governance and democracy. What is democracy? Who defines democracy? Africans now believe, courtesy of Europe and America, that democracy means periodic elections. that once you have elections, which we have perfected the art of rigging, then you have multi-party politics, then that is democracy. I no longer use the word democracy. I use the word governance. And governance is not Coca-Cola. Nyerere used to say that the Coca-Colaization of governance is the problem of Africa. Each country will have its own way of having a system of government where people are involved. The governance in Denmark is not the same governance in Spain. It is not the same governance in Italy or France or India or Thailand or Vietnam. African countries, and permit me to warn myself that Africa is not homogeneous, it is heterogeneous. What happens in Eswatini is not what happens in Benin. In appreciation of that heterogeneity, we can come up with systems which will ultimately lead to a confederal Africa. My other colleagues will answer the other questions. That is my contribution.
Jana?
I'll just maybe add on two things to the brother who talked about borderless Africa, one currency Africa. I'm glad the African Development Bank actually is also hosting a meeting at the margins of the summit, particularly on this visa-free issue. And if we want the continental trade agreement to actually work, where we want to see even greater intra-Africa trade, we have to allow Africans of African descent with African passports being able to travel within Africa, because we are the ones who suffer the most and struggle the most to travel within this continent. Only 4 countries right now allow Africans to enter without requiring a visa: Seychelles, Benin, Gambia, and Rwanda. Everybody else is still imposing a visa system. Of course, there are other countries that now allow us at least a visa upon arrival. So that's one. And then on the issue raised by Brigadier on governance, I think Prof. Thomas really raised the issues very well. You will find a lot of Africans will agree with you. We have seen these challenges of a constitutional change of government or unsatisfactory elections. You talk of Nigeria, you talk of Mozambique, Kenya, you talk of Guinea. We can name the countries. So we really do need to visit this democracy, good governance, what it really means, because what it is said to mean is not the reality that Africans are finding as their reality. Right now, we've seen the Mozambicans being quiet and never mind their protest of the result, but the leaders have endorsed what they've endorsed and life is moving on. Something definitely has to change there. So you'll find a lot of people will align with the statements that you read, Brigadier.
Thank you. Or do you want to rather join the next round?
Let me just say one thing about some of the issues that the Indian ambassador raised, and thank you, sir, for raising the issue of African solutions, and particularly in relation with the UN Security Council. It's quite a tricky thing. I mean, experience shows that the UN Security Council is more comfortable deciding over issues when they have been discussed by the Peace and Security Council in Addis and tabled as an African position that is now transmitted by the A3. But what happens oftentimes is that there is no prepared position by the PSC. The A3 gets confused, and we have a Security Council that decides on various interests. You have a case in point now, the DRC. There's a resolution that was brought in, that was prepared by the penholder, France, and who's blocking the resolution. It's not any P5, it's actually the A3. Because African solutions are visibly that you don't antagonize any African member state. And if a resolution wants to do that, you rather have no resolution than something that actually could help move with a solution. So African solutions sometimes struggle to take difficult decisions, hide behind a non-existing consensus, and at the end of the day, we have a deterioration in the DRC of the humanitarian situation. So and this has to do with some unease at the African Union with voting. You know, the PSC never votes, not because it is prescribed by anything, yeah, but it seems to be a habit that you should take decisions that do not antagonize anyone. That defies sometimes the role of politics. We should be able to, at some point, take decisions that not everybody agrees with. That's also politics. So in that sense, I think the PSC, a responsible PSC should actually prepare decisions that are taken by the UN Security Council. To do that, we need a better synchronization of the monthly agenda of the PSC and the UN Security Council. Because, as we all know, most of the issues, particularly security issues, the UN Security Council tables are African. So an African position will actually put anyone, including the most important P5, no one will dare take a stance that is opposite to what the PSC has suggested and the A3 are actually advocating for. Thank you.
Thank you. Prof. Tieku, I will come to you in the next round. Because of time, I would like to take the next round of questions. Beginning with the one at the back, now in the middle, then here. Yes, you. The colleague there, and you. Anybody on the other side? Okay, I will come to you. So, Desiree. He's in the middle, the back row.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to make a few contributions. My name is Desiree Asogbavi. I work for Open Society as an Africa Advocacy Advisor. I want to take the last point discussed. It's about the leadership, the upcoming leadership at the EU Commissions. And I fully endorse the submission of Professor Tieku Thomas on what it takes to be a good chairperson of the EU Commission. But I also want to observe that having seen in action various chairpersons of the EU Commission, I have the impression that they have not used fully the power given to them by the EU policy document. They have not. They have more power than what we have seen so far. So, and maybe one of which will be to call member states accountable, hold them accountable onto the decisions they have taken themselves. For example, at the beginning of the assembly, why not the chairperson have a preparation of how much they have advanced in the implementation of the decision taken in the previous summit at the opening ceremony, and call on member states just to honor their own commitments because they took decisions. Because that's one of the most important problems at the EU now. So the second one is about the importance to maybe establish an informal, a kind of recurrent informal consultative mechanism between the chairperson and the members of the PRC. We have seen over the time a lot of, I won't call it fights, but some resistance between the two bodies. Maybe a good way is for a new chairperson to set up something informal, repetitive consultation of the PRC on big issues on the table of the commission, for example. And lastly, I would like to say that the Africa is at the crossroad marked by the current geopolitical dynamic. So the upcoming team, both at the Commission and at the head of the Union itself, have an historical duty to take the continent ahead. For example, how should we get to a stronger agreement on the management of our mineral resources, which we are calling now critical minerals, having something bolder, stronger than the African mining vision, because the immediate future is going to be all about critical mineral. We all see it happening. How can our continent make sure that they have a stronger agreement on how we manage it going forward? There's something, for example, that the Commission has to catalyze, create a forum of discussions, clear and very bold discussion with the member states, basically to take it forward. And I'll finish by that. Last point, very last
10
point.
seconds.
We fail to have a stronger consolidated African Union on the 2007 process. This is the moment to go back to it. Again, looking at the geopolitics, this is a moment to have a stronger union. No more comment, I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I think it's largely calls for very important actions to be taken. And I think these are proposals that are noted very well for particularly the reports that will come out of this meeting. But there's a question about how can Africa get agreement on the management of critical resources. That please note it for a response. Yes, please. Please keep it brief. We do not have much time on our side.
Thank you for giving me this chance. My name is Amanil from Addis Ababa University student. I have a question regarding to the crisis in Africa. This means this can reposition Africa and to
Mike, please.
Influence for the other nation. Africa must born good leaders. These leaders must born by academia. How to produce this kind of leaders in Africa? Okay. Because a leader crisis in Africa. Okay. Because there is no agreement or peace in Africa. That's what the one question. The second question is that regarding to the contacting and working with together with strong linkage with other continent like Europe, America, USA, and other country. How we contact, what the linkage, what is influence with mineral resource. Because our mineral resource exploded. Because of this, there is a crisis in Africa.
Okay.
So that's why. How do we work with other continents like developed countries?
Got it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes. How do we work with other continents? And then also, how do we produce leaders to address the leadership crisis on the continent? That is noted. 1, 2. The left side, any question there? I think you've had a chance, so maybe, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Getachew. I am representing a civil society in Ethiopia. We work on peace, democracy, and good governance. A very brief question. When we think about governance and focus about the African Union and its roles, where should the focus be? Addressing internal issues or going to address issues outside? Thank you.
Straight to the point. Yes, the one at the back, please.
Thank you very much for the presenters. Thank you, Professor Lumumba. My question goes to you. The question that AU need to reposition itself amid changing global situations. Yes, it must, because the political landscape is fastly changing. That change also includes maybe it amounts a global order change as the fight between the East and the West is, become tense. And the rise of right wings in Europe and even including in America will have a very big implication. Therefore, Africa must prepare itself for a new possibilities, including what Professor Lumumba repeatedly remind us, that the possibility of the new scramble for Africa is possible because of the rise of right wings in America and in Europe as a whole. So my question to Professor Lumumba is that when you say that China, Turkey, US aid, you just lump all countries together, but historically and practically, their role is not the same. For example, China's investment in Ethiopia and China's investment in different countries is not the same as historical relationship of Africa with the West and so on. So why would you just lump countries together, given that their experience is different? The outcomes maybe varies from one country to another. There is a possibility of exploitation, but you lump things together. So another issue that, given the structural problems of the world, we are coming up with, I'm finishing, BRICS issue. So how do you see the threat coming from America against BRICS, and that BRICS is given is alternative to the structural problem of the world? What is your suggestion on that? Thank you.
Prof, so given the differences of history, why are you lumping many countries together? Why are you blaming the excesses of others on the innocence of others? Any burning question? Okay, so let me pick the last two and we wrap up with you, please. Because of the time, yes. Please keep it brief. Only one question.
Thank you very much. Very interesting from all of you. I'm Jara Mengistu from the IPSS and Leiden University. As this question goes to Dr. Lumumba, how do you relate the what has been said by other members today about leaving the past behind, and how aren't we going to be prisoners of the past and take African agency into accountability when looking at history and the present? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Oluwakemi from Nigeria, and I'm with the IPSS. So my question is around youth and women. When we're talking about AU repositioning, we have to actually talk about youth and women. And right now, I'm just speaking from the perspective of being a youth. Many African youth actually don't have the mindset of actually being in Africa again because they don't believe in the capacity of the leaders. So I'm really so much concerned at what the leaders of African is doing to build African youth mindset of actually staying in their own country and not traveling to the Western states, because that's actually what they need right now. So my question is basically, what can the African leaders do to make African youth stay in their country and contribute to the growth of African states? Thank you.
Thank you. So, Prof, it's about what can countries do to make Africa attractive? And last, yes, please keep it 10 seconds.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Henok from the Institute of Foreign Affairs. My question maybe forward to Professor Lumumba or Dr. Simon concerning repositioning. Did we have a position as far as African Union is concerned? When you talk about African Union, it's working on behalf of Africa. So is there any possibility of repositioning the African Union in a changing global governance? Either it could be the World Health Organization or FAO or UN Human Rights Council. Is there any position and possibility? Are we pessimist or optimist? Yeah.
Okay. You know, for a minute, I thought you were going to tell us your position also on that one, whether you are optimist or, but I would like to start with Prof. Tieku. You never got a chance with the first round of questions. Is there any of them you want to take?
Let me Let me touch briefly on the Desiree's excellent point that he raised, and particularly the issue of the PRC, right? That I think he's proposing that there has to be an informal kind of consultation between the two of them. But I would rather want us to go back to what the AU statutes, as well as the statute of the commission, as well as the constitutive act. The PRC is only there to prepare for the meeting of the executive committee. It is not there to micromanage the organization. It is institutionally not designed for that, because it has no institutional memory, and the capacity to do it is not there. But they have taken advantage of the power over the pairs, or the management of the pairs, to micromanage the organization. And that's part of the problem. Okay, so that's I think the first point. The second point is that I think as Africans, we have got to a point where we have to begin, and this is in particular within the AU, to respect the rules that we create and that we establish. The challenge within the AU is not that we don't have good rules. The rules are there, but they are not respected when it comes to hiring and so many other issues. So we need, that's why I think for me, the first thing that needs to change, going back to the first question, is that we need a leader who respects rules and is willing to apply the rules of the AU. Desiree said wonderfully that commissioners and chairpersons and deputies don't often use their powers. The statute stipulates clearly that you are not supposed to take instruction from member state. Yet commissioners as well as chairpersons regularly take instructions from member state, and that is undermining the organization. And that is the number one that needs to change. Second, member states should recognize that the AU will not be necessary if our countries and governments are working properly. And therefore, once you create the organization, allow the organization to work. The influence of member states has set us back in a way that has not helped at all, particularly in the last 10 years. And I think we need to go back to the period where we select the best commissioners, select the best people within the AU, and allow them to work. And then the last point that I will make, and then I will shut up on the question of decision making. We are also at a point where, as Africans, as the AU, we should make decisions based on evidence. It has to be evidence-based rather than politically impulsive decision making. Both the reforms, the Kagame reforms, and then even the decision, the rotational decision, the decision to base the election on rotational basis, it's impulse driven. It's not driven by any evidence. If they have done a little bit of research, they will know very well that the outcome is not going to be good, and we shouldn't go there. So that's the point that I think I'll end there, or maybe I'll just add one tiny, because this is very important, which is, how do we produce good leaders? There's a division within the literature. One school of thought is of the opinion that we should set up leadership schools to be able to do, and the other school suggests that leadership is a cross-cutting issue, and therefore it has to be embedded at different levels. And I tend to agree that we have to start on the continent, right from the beginning, introducing and building ethical leadership within our school system. I think part of the challenge that we have is that our schools have failed us in terms of molding ethically minded individuals are willing and prepared to often do the right thing and respect rules. I'll end here. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Prof. Tieku. I would like to turn to Dr. Paul Simon. If you can take just 1 minute.
I'll probably take less. Thanks, Andy. And I will address the question of African positions. Thanks for that. I think there have been instances where whatever is Africa has had common positions, be it at the level of the AU or in other fora. There are issues on which there is a consensus among African states and on a wide range of issues. But there are general issues. And now, I guess that's where your question is going, that's the direction the question is taking. Being a member of the G20 will actually force the AU to probably review its ways of operating, both at the level of the Commission and at the level of the rotating chairship. At the level of the Commission, a more technical capacity will need to be created to follow the whole process between the summit, because the G20 is a very technical, financial, and economic process. And there too, in the way the whole thing is being done, you can see the lack of trust between the Commission and member states. Member states wanting to control the process. And in my view, the bulk of the technical work should rest on the shoulders of the Commission, and it should be capacitated to do so. The rotating chairship can deal with the political representation, but the technical one should rest on the... But it's a new thing. I mean, the AU is a classic intergovernmental organization, now becoming an international relations actor. How do you do that? Who represents the AU? Is it the AU Commission chair? Is it the rotating chair? How do you develop actually something that looks like an African public interest? So these are that the AU, meaning the member state and the Commission, will have to answer. Thank you.
I think turning to Jana, there's an unanswered question about how do you make Africa attractive? And then also the question about what are we saying clearly about repositioning Africa? Are we pessimistic or optimistic? I think between you and Prof,
I'm very optimistic because I believe we do have good leaders in Africa. They're just not the ones, most of them, running our countries. Because political systems, as we've seen, as we're critiquing, our election processes don't necessarily give us the very best that is available in our countries. But we do have good leadership in Africa. We just don't step into the political realm, and that maybe is the challenge. And when we do, we find it so dirty. We go into the private sector and other spaces, and something has to change there. I really want to touch about, build off on the theme that Prof. PLO, when he talked about black and beautiful is nonsense, but black and powerful. Paul, you also echoed it. For me, a powerful Africa, Desiree is right, we have to go back to that 2007 moment where we had started again the conversation that was started by Kwame Nkrumah in 2063, which PLO started us off. If Africa does not act as one, all these things we are saying and doing will remain things we say and talk about. And the state that was painted of what is going on this continent will continue to reproduce the figures and the statistics. Africa has to operate as one. That's the way, I think, for me, we become powerful. And what is said is, this was foreseen back in 2063. We continue to allow external foreign interference into our affairs, into our priorities, and therefore still do not have the boldness and courage to define what is rightly good for us. It's very small-minded to continue to want to run this continent in its fragmentation of the 55 states or 55 jurisdictions, maybe let me put it that way, when facing the kinds of challenges that are actually forcing the world to think together collectively. And so it's not going to be a competition. We are not going to be one of the actors that can be counted in the so-called international community if Africa continues to operate this way. I exaggerated, of course, when I was talking about the 210 platforms of Africa and Africa. Honestly, that has to stop. For me, Agenda 2063 was actually an opportunity that can be leveraged. We created a blueprint that we at least aligned that on these things we do agree we need to get there. So how do we build on that since we are now in 2025? So for me, a powerful Africa is one that acts as one Africa. And this G20 opportunity, I hope, Paul, it really challenges us to rise to what you are pointing out, because we're actually going to be eaten with our eyes wide open now with our permission, because we are also now on the table if we do not change how we are operating. So, and I hope our leaders and rulers can really, really take our advice of, I'll still call it my A7, his P5, will share notes. And that something starts that just brings back some pro-African actions for the continent and the people of the continent.
For the continent. Thank you. Prof?
Thank you very much.
Plenty time, so.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. Number one, I agree with you, Emmanuel. We have different crises. How we navigate those crises in a manner that is sustainable is going to be very important. And I want to be understood very clearly. I've written a paper, so there is an extent to which my short presentation does not speak to the detail in my paper. And what I want to tell us, and we have analyzed the crisis. People have suggested solutions. If you look on the question of aid, Zambia's Dambisa Moyo has talked about dead aid. Rita, if you look about the gentleman who talked about lumping people together, we are saying that they are traditional colonizers whose interests have remained. The British, the French, and those colonizers, their interests have remained but have been redefined. But there are new players which were not colonizers in that sense. China, for example, has had cooperation with the continent of Africa in the building of infrastructure. Those of you from Zambia will remember the Tazara Railway, the collaboration with Zimbabwe and other things. But China is an emerging power with interests, which are also military. And if you are not organized, if we Africans are not organized, they are going to redefine how they relate with us. And we must warn ourselves and ensure that our collaboration with China remains at the level of mutual respect and the relationship is symbiotic. And I want you to read a book, I think, that has been written once again by Dambisa Moyo. Even India is an emerging power. And there is a whole book that has been written, The Rise of China and India in Africa, and one that talks about Africa being the new factory of the world. All these things, you'll see military projection. Look at Turkey. Turkey now wants to patrol the boundaries of Somalia. That is military projection. So we are saying that all these things must not be ignored, and the weaker we are, the more susceptible we are. But if we are organized, one thing that has not been mentioned here are the regional organization, the REX, SADC, East Africa, and all these. These are the building blocks. If you come to East Africa, in the year 2004, the treaty says we'll have a common market, a customs union, and ultimately a political federation. In 2004, we first tried to fast track, and the first president ought to have been sworn in the year 2010, and the first common currency in the year 2009. That did not happen. Should we stop? No, because we believe that the regional building blocks will help to anchor the continent of Africa. Are we stuck in the past? No, the past is the present. There is no past. The things that we are talking about are the very same things that are happening now. And there is a book I commend to you, is written by the South Korean economist Ha Jun Chang, The Bad Samaritan. He says, citing the Roman philosopher Cicero, that anybody who forgets the past is in danger of missing the present and the future. So I urge you to remember that what we call the past is the present. The question is focus on solutions. We can only focus on solutions when we understand the past. And lastly, the question of AU. You know, when we talk about repositioning, did we have a position in the first place? Because you only reposition when you had a position in the first place. This eclectic reaction to situations is not position. If you ask what is the coherent AU formal policy position, they don't have. That is why you have Russians calling us in Sochi, Chinese calling us in Beijing, Americans calling us in Washington, and then the following day they call Kenya, they call Nigeria. If we had a coherent policy position, we'd say, once you've met Africa, it will be cascaded to the member countries, no calling individual countries. So my own view is there is work to be done. And I conclude with this, Mr. Chairman. One, when you listen to Africa, and many of you who are present here know Africa, they are friends of goodwill. And when you hear some of us saying the thing that we are not saying that we are shutting Africa out from the rest of the world. We are saying that the rest of the world needs a strong Africa. Only yesterday, those of you who are from Europe, Ursula von der Leyen has made a comment about the role and status of Europe in NATO. In other words, Europe is grappling with her membership in NATO. Why should Africa grapple with her position regarding how she relates with the rest of the world? So, it is not easy. Are we optimistic? Hope and optimism must never die. But we are not going to hope and be optimistic and then imagine that we'll pray and fast and manna will fall from heaven. No. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think for the online audience, you will have to forgive us that we've not been able to take your comments and questions. We are just wrapping up. But I took note of a comment online saying that they need clarity whether we think it's possible to position Africa. And so in wrapping up, I don't know who wants to take a pattern shot. 10 seconds. What is your final view on all of that? And okay. Who wants to take a final shot? Wrap it all up for us.
Because I had the key, let me close the door by saying we are at crossroads. And when you read my paper, this is what I want to conclude with. In my epigram, I've made 2 citations. One is from a writer called Charles Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I want you to read it in context. And the second epigram is a 1995 statement made by Julius Kambarage Nyerere of Tanzania. And this is what he said in part, that Africa will never realize our potential on the basis of institutions which are not conceived by Africans, and if adopted from other civilizations, are not adapted to the reality of the continent of Africa. That is what I want to conclude with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the panel for excellent reflections. Prof. Tieku, thank you so much for sitting up at 2 a.m. to be part of this conversation. And the online audience, whilst forgiving us for not taking your questions, we appreciate you for granting us extra time on these discussions. I think the conversation continues. There's work to be done if we are going to position Africa. Unity is required, but much more importantly, focus on what is most important. There's so much that Africa can do, but there's so much that Africa needs to do for Africa to be able to do what it needs to do. The debate begins, and I think that the answer also relies on what you think and can take it up in the policy spaces. Thank you so much for coming. Once again, we appreciate the donors who always support the ISS for us to have this conversation. And we want to be able to see you next time in another dialogue and conversation on this thing. Thank you very much.